Deep in the suburbs of Rochester, Minnesota in 1988, a gruesome crime unfolded, never before seen in the history of the town. The shock waves left everyone paralyzed. How could any child do such a horrible thing to their family? This was the case of teen killer Davidbrom, a murderous boy who just about had enough of the rules in his house. And so, he decided to do something about it. But before we get into the case, if you are here already watching it, please consider subscribing so you can get notified when I upload a new video. So without any further ado, let's move on with the case. As teenagers, I'm sure many of us got into arguments with our parents. It's all part of the angst that comes with puberty. As a general rule, teenagers like to rebel. And that rebellion often causes a lot of heated discussions. Many of us learned to suck it up and deal with it in our own ways. But what happens when a chronically depressed and mentally unstable 16-year-old gets into several religious arguments with his father? Well, you're about to find out in this ever so extreme case of Davidbrom. David's case was so serious that the brutal murder of his parents was planned months before he executed it. He even went as far as talking about it to several people before the fateful night. Of course, no one at his school ever believed he could actually kill his parents. Everyone simply figured that ranting was just his way of blowing off steam. That was until February of 1988. If you were a pedestrian walking past the Brom family home on that evening, you would never have suspected that an ugly mess had taken place inside. Davidbrom had 3 siblings, and he was the second oldest out of the 3. His parents were Catholic, and no one held that faith more than his father, Bernard Brom. Bernard was an advisory engineer at IBM, and he had joined the company in July of 1968. The family didn't really have to worry about money after that. Bernard and his wife Paulette served at the local Catholic church and was very devout. Both of them were also leaders in a marriage counseling program at the church. This dedication to their faith was what sparked the argument between David and his father on the 18th of February. David had a disagreement with his father about the music he listened to, which may have led to the deed. When recounting the story to a classmate later, he said they had gotten into the argument at around 11:30 p.m. to the previous night. Still furious from the altercation, David then stayed up until about 3 a.m. That was when he could not hold his anger. He stood up, walked to the basement, and picked up an axe. His first location was already in his mind, his parents' room. He went there first, hitting his father with an axe while he slept. With each blow, his dad kept on getting up, but David made sure he stayed down. Soon enough, Bernard Brom was dead. That was not enough for David. His anger was still not satisfied. He met his mother in the hallway when he was heading out, and before she could say anything, he smashed her head with the axe. David then went to his brother's room but discovered he wasn't around. When he came back outside, he saw his sister standing over their mother in the upstairs hallway, sobbing and wailing. At this point, he proceeded to finish the job he started. He attacked and murdered them both. Thursday morning, David walked into Lourdes' room Catholic high school with a wicked-looking smile on his face. Friends at school stated he had colored his hair black, shaved the sides of his head, and spiked the hair on the back of his head. He began to tell everyone that he had murdered his parents. And soon enough, the people started talking. The story spread like wildfire, even though no one was sure if he had actually done it. Eventually, word got to the teachers. According to court documents, officers were called to the Brom residence after receiving information from one of the teachers regarding a rumor that something dreadful had occurred in the Brom residence. The corpses of Bernard Brom, 43, his wife Paulette, 42, and their children, Diane, 13, and Rick, 11, were discovered in their nightgowns on that Thursday evening at the family's house. According to the town sheriff's testimony, the four were killed early that morning. He claimed a bloodied axe 2 to 3 feet long was discovered in the basement of the home, in a peaceful, well-to-do neighborhood, just outside the 60,000-person city in southeastern Minnesota. The authorities were terrified that David might have been abducted soon enough after the terrible finding. However, a friend of David's alerted the police that Davidbrom had told her that he had murdered his family, and she testified about the conversation of the subsequent trial. She told jurors at the trial that Brom approached her on her way to school on February of 18 and urged her to skip class with him. He then went into detail about how he murdered his parents, brother, and sister. According to a police dispatcher, Davidbrom was arrested at the main Rochester post office because someone called Sheriff Von Wald's office to report seeing a person matching the boy's description at a telephone booth near the post office. The police rushed out immediately. They were on the lookout for an average height teenager with dyed hair wearing pink tennis shoes. The officers sent to apprehend him entered the post office with their guns drawn. They saw him right away, standing with his back to the door, looking absent-mindedly at a bunch of vending machines. They silently motioned to some customers standing in line to move away as fast as possible. That was when Brom turned around. On February 19, 1988, Davidbrom was apprehended after using a pay phone near the local post office. He gave no resistance to the police officers. It was a very quiet drive back to the police station. Throughout the ride, Brom remained still and sat silently in the back of the car. It was the calm before the next storm. His case was sent to the juvenile court system, at first because he was only 16 at the time of the crime, but he was subsequently transferred to the adult judicial system due to the severity of the crime. Olmsted County Sheriff Kevin Torgerson was the first deputy on the scene. When he thinks back on his 34-year career in law enforcement, he recalls innumerable cases, but none compared to February 18, 1988. Torgerson said, "All I knew was that something was wrong, and all I recall about the phone call was that Davidbrom had made some kind of threat to his father." Torgerson had only been in law enforcement for 4 years, 2 of them in Rochester, when he was called to make a welfare check at the Brom house. Torgerson knew which house it was, but he was scared to enter immediately. He decided to wait for backup, even though the darkness was already setting. When his partner arrived, they tracked footsteps up the driveway and into the garage service door. The garage light was turned on, and deputies could determine from wet tracks that a vehicle had recently entered and exited the garage. They walked into the house, crying out to whoever was inside. They moved slowly through the first floor. Nothing except a shambles in the bathroom caused by David's return home to shave the sides of his head and color his hair black. The deputies called again. Nothing happened. They were now in full search mode. They pulled firearms and expanded their search, no longer declaring their presence. Torgerson continues by explaining how to go to the bedrooms upstairs. He could see the scene clearly when he reached the top of the stairs. In front of him, he discovered both females stacked on top of each other. "We've got 2 bodies up here," he said quietly to his partner. It was a truly horrifying sight. You can hear the skilled law enforcement officer's voice break as he recounts the experience. He walked in further and then got into the corner of the hallway, where there was a little entry leading to Ricky's room. The little brother was laying in bed in a fetal position. He had a massive injury to the head with multiple other injuries across his body. The sight of the boy laying there and clutching a little blanket is one that will never leave the officer's mind. In his opinion, even Alfred Hitchcock cannot write the script to describe what happened in the Brom household that morning. Joe Brom, the oldest kid, was 19 years old and did not live at home at the time. He eventually relocated to New York and began teaching philosophy. He died of cancer some years ago. The murders instantly became a media sensation. News outlets covered them day and night, and soon enough it was a major topic in popular discussion. David was taken into custody, and it was reported he was quite nervous and afraid. However, the adolescent appeared composed during a 15-minute arraignment, in which he was charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder and 8 counts of second-degree murder. The allegations vary in their degree of premeditation or intent. He did not enter a plea. According to Olmsted County Attorney Raymond Schmitz, the youngster was ordered to undergo psychiatric examination and was placed at the county jail on a 24-hour watch. David was very depressed at the time of his crime. According to medical records and testimony of his trial, David, a Catholic prep school sophomore, had tried suicide twice, the most recent attempt being just a few months before the killings. A few friends said that he had discussed killing his family for 6 months. The case drew global attention because of the awful level of violence, Brom's young age, and a mental disorder diagnosis. He went on trial when he turned 18 and never took the stand as a witness. Adolescent angst is a natural force as powerful and elemental as gravity, and David Brom, based on observations of him at the time, had plenty of it. He was a sophomore at Lord's High School and the second oldest of Bernard and Paulette Brom's 4 children. He worked part-time as a cook at Henry Wellington Restaurant in downtown Rochester with his elder brother Joe, who was 19 at the time. Joe, who liked punk rock music and adopted its aesthetic into his personal style, including wearing eyeliner, was living with family friends away from home. He had not parted on good terms with his childhood home. Bernard and Paulette had vowed that none of their other children would follow Joe's lead. At home, the regulations were tightened. David would begin to resist such rules. Friends say Bernard took up jogging to spend more time with David and was also helping him fix up an old car. Diane and Ricky, David's younger siblings, were both cheerful and energetic. David was one praised by family members as dependable and friendly. He babysat for a neighbor's family, shoveled a neighbor's driveway, and refused to accept payment for it. He also had a lot of friends. Later events would reveal the existence of darker currents beneath the surface. According to a Minneapolis doctor who did a court-ordered evaluation of David about a month after the killings, David attempted suicide twice in 1987 in June and September. He felt bereaved since two of his closest friends had moved away and his beloved brother Joe had departed. He also claimed to have experienced a sense of oppression at home. On April 5, 1989, hearings were held to determine whether David should be tried as a juvenile or as an adult. The stakes would be high if David was convicted as a juvenile and released before his 19th birthday. Conviction as an adult would result in a substantial longer sentence. The decision by Judge Gerald Ring on April of 22 to try David in the juvenile system sparked public outcry. Threats were made against the judge. Ring disagreed with his own decision, but claimed he was forced to do it due to state law regulations. Ring's decision was eventually reversed by the state appeals court and, following David's defense attorney's appeal by the state Supreme Court, Davidbrom was set to stand trial as an adult. During the trial, David's defense attorney was effectively forced to admit David was linked by far too much direct evidence and testimony. There was no other logical explanation for the crimes. That portion of the trial was completed in less than a week, with the 12-member jury deliberating for only 4 hours before finding David guilty of first-degree murder. In Phase 2 of the trial, 3 psychiatrists were called to testify on Brom's mental state, 1 for the prosecution, 1 for the defense, and 1 for the court. The McNaughton Rule, which states that a criminal defendant cannot be held liable for a crime if he did not recognize the nature of his act or that it was morally wrong, would be applied to that testimony. David was determined to be mentally competent by 7 of the 8 mental health doctors who evaluated him, including 2 of the 3 who testified. The last witness, a forensic psychologist, stated that David had been suffering from visual hallucinations for years and that he had 3 unique identities. He blamed the murders on a mental episode. The other professionals, as well as the prosecution and judge, were doubtful of the assessment. There was no other way out for Davidbrom. On October 3, 1989, a Rochester, Minnesota jury delivered an unhappy 18th birthday present to Davidbrom. He was convicted of 4 charges of first-degree murder. A week later, the same jury dismissed Brom's claim that he was insane when he murdered his father, mother, and 2 siblings with 56 blows from an axe. He was sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms plus 1 concurrent life term and will be eligible for parole when he reaches the age of 70. Brom was ruled to serve 17 and a half years for each life sentence and a total of 52 and a half years behind bars under the state laws in force at the time. Following his punishment, the judge allegedly went to her chambers and sobbed over the sorrow of the crimes in David's squandered life. David's crime, while extraordinarily brutal, was not that unusual at the time. What's notable is that his case addressed 2 legal issues: that crimes committed by a 16-year-old do not deserve to be tried in adult court, and that Minnesota's insanity defense is out of touch with reality and unfair to defendants who were mentally ill at the time of their crimes. David was very depressed at the time of his crime. According to medical records and testimony at his trial. But are we really going to accept depression as a proper motivation for his gruesome murder? Even the popular story going around at the time about the music tape was not confirmed by the man in question. So why? Why did Davidbrom, a 16-year-old high school sophomore, kill his parents, 13-year-old sister, and 11-year-old brother with an axe in the middle of the night? Well, we may never find out. Brom, now a 50-year-old inmate in the Minnesota Correctional Facility in Stillwater, has done nothing to resolve the long-standing mystery. In the years since the murders, he has turned down multiple interview requests, including one in January of 2021. He was also not forthcoming with his trial attorney, Terry Walters, regarding his motivations. He will be eligible for parole in 2041. No one can possibly say what goes through the mind of a deranged killer like this while locked up.